My aim in this project was to gain a deeper understanding of Unreal Engine 5 and Fmod in order to create music and sound design that would be appropriate and immersive in its use. My process began with finding the right instruments and what I wanted the music to do. I decided upon a heavily synth-based theme for when the player was in or near enough a factory, which is very upbeat and focuses on activity, whereas the desert section, which played for a variety of Eastern instruments and voices, was a more atmospheric section focused on exploration and taking in the surroundings. The transition into progressed parts of the music was done over time, and the instruments I used were once again synths and Eastern instruments, but I took it upon myself to make them more spacious editions of the music, with those sections having 3 new instruments that were each compatible with the previous compositions and were to be placed into the track together, to have the music transition naturally into the second sections. I went to a recording studio and spent all day working on the sound effects and sound design of my game, ranging from something like a metal keychain hitting rock to an inhaler pump burst. Fmod proved to be the easiest part of my process, as after inserting the music and sounds, then cutting them to size, I created 2 parameters for my music type and progression, each being responsible for different transitions. The music for the initial factory section and desert section were controlled by music type, which was always a number between 0 and 1, with 0 to 0.5 being factory music and 0.51 to 1 being desert music. Progression, however, operated on automation for most of the piece, with the later sections coming into the regular music upon certain milestones. However, when the progression parameter was increased, new parts were being added to the music and getting louder as progression went up, until 16 on progression, which then, depending on whether the player was in a factory or desert at the time, the music transitions into the next piece, which completely leaves the original section behind. All of this music was made with many varying parts, so the game progressed. It made the composition as vertical as possible, so that no matter how long it took someone to play it, the music rarely ever had a repeating section. The sound design in Fmod I made was footsteps, which I had several takes of each, which then were controlled by another parameter called terrain, and depending on what number it was, decided upon which footstep sound was made. I also layered each step with the robot moving noise to add another layer to the sound design. I also created wind sounds that had been automated with EQ, depending on the music type parameter. With the factory having high-end frequencies cut, another couple of things to mention were my robot duplication, which was the robot moving layered together when I initially recorded it, and the button press. The end of this section was mixing all my music before building and sending it to Unreal. This was where most of the hardships of this project originated. However, the first thing I added was the music, which I made into a blueprint. I controlled the parameters by using the set parameter nodes and tying them to box colliders around the factories in the game. I made the bot control the changing parameter based on his location, and if it was interacting with the orbs, change the progression parameter. In the end, I had managed to make the music system operate as intended. The issue with this section was that no matter what actor left the boxes for the factories, the music would shift, which I found near the end and had to struggle to find out that I needed to make sure the bot actor was the one that was in charge of leaving or entering being tied to the music. As when the orbs were being picked up, the music would shift. Therefore, I needed to make sure that the the orbs would not be hindering the music transitions. The buttons were tied to each floor button with the command of playing the attached Fmod event only once when the player stepped on the collider to interact with it. Orbs needed a pickup sound and hum, which I made in Logic with a synthesizer and tied them directly to the class blueprint, with the hum being an audio component with a radius that made the hum louder the closer the player was. Then I placed the wind event in as well as the duplication event, the latter of which was a play event to the Fmod event in the bot's blueprint whenever the player duplicated. I also used meta sound to create the jetpack sound whenever the player activated it. Finally, I created several physical materials that I attached to materials corresponding to the floor type that it was named after, and then in the blueprint of the animation of the robot controlled the terrain the bot walked on and had during the walking animation, what physical material was stepping on, and depending on which material was being stepped on, the corresponding footstep would sound. Once that was done, I finalized my game and built it. I achieved my goal in creating an immersive and appropriate soundscape and soundtrack for StackOBot, with my knowledge of Unreal getting tested as well as my prior experience with Fmod, which came with many struggles that I overcame and fixed. I thoroughly enjoyed this project and believe it helped me greatly gain a deeper understanding of how sound and music in video game industry works.